We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, back and better than ever on a Tuesday, brand new week, coming to you live on Rumble, 10:30 Eastern time as usual, guys. As usual, because we're back to Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30 on the Eastern Seaboard. You could always find us, rumble.com/amradpod, also available on X, at X America News, at my X profile, at Real Steve Friend. And we got the YouTube channel set up. I'll try to put some stuff out on the gram, the Instagram, back in the swing of things on this hobbyist podcast, because I am here. I need to give full disclosure. I'm here in an independent capacity as an American citizen who's fully authorized to exercise his First Amendment rights to talk about open source information and my opinions on things generally in the news, using my unique perspective and background and opinion that you come here to get. I'm not representing any agencies of the government, any arms of the government. I'm just here, day 42, waiting for my 30-day reinstatement. I guess that is inflation from the government's perspective, but we'll leave that aside today because we got a lot to get to. I've been on a hiatus here for 6 weeks now, and those muscles as a podcast host, a hobbyist podcast host, I will note, they might have atrophied. So I like to impart the wisdom to my boys when they go and play their Pop Warner football that you don't always control if you're going to play good or bad. What can you control? You can control your level of preparation and your level of effort. So I put in some preparation. I've got an outline off to my side here. I'm going to give you the old college try, the best effort that I possibly can. But we don't know if maybe that perishable skill of sitting here and staring into a lens by yourself in your house could be something like firearms. If you don't use it, you'll lose the skill. We'll do our best, though, to bring the most articulate and no uptalk intonement, no use or misuse of the term literally, to give you an entertaining and informative show. Because today on episode 254, we're talking threat review prioritization, which is a play on a term that I had a lot of experience with. It involves integrated program management, IPM. That, for those who don't know, haven't necessarily been tracking with the American Radicals Podcast, that's the bane of my existence. That's really one of the big things that I brought forward to Congress and to other sources that be that there's a quota system that exists within the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It's concerning to me. I don't think that law enforcement exists like a widget factory that should be hitting its quarterly quotas. I don't think the American people expect that either. It's a problem that was brought to the current director of the FBI's awareness, and yet it still exists. And part of that is TRP, Threat Review Prioritization. It means basically, how are we going to rank the threats? What's most important? What's something that we should be evaluating at a higher level? What's something that we should be devoting more manpower and resources to because it's more threatening in nature? And I do think there is a place for that. There are certain things that are out there that are more important. There's things out there that we should devote the attention to. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that. There was a recent story that came out, and because we live in a 12-minute news cycle, it kind of just went by the wayside. But my guest today, George Hill, will be joining us in a minute. He identified it, and I concurred. This is one of the greatest threats out there, and we're going to have a deep discussion about the discovery of a sim farm in the general New York City area, and a subsequent story by The Blaze about how that sim farm has been run and stood up by the Chinese Communist Party in our homeland. That is a real threat. So we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about some potential corruption that exists in United States territories that ties directly back to the Chinese. We're going to dig into the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how that plays out. Financial compromise. We are, after all, in this government shutdown. So are there federal employees who might be compromised? Is that a concern if you have a security clearance? George certainly had his experience where someone tried to compromise him so he could regale us with that story and what really is the threat there. We'll talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center and how we've kicked them out, no longer going to be giving educational materials or their perspectives on things to federal law enforcement. And they have in the past. And I think people need to know about just how deep that went. And then we will also close it out with a look at the broken judiciary, broken judges who have refused to accept reality. So, long intro has come to a conclusion. I'm going to bring on my friend, you can't say former. He's a United States Marine, was in the Navy, the NSA, supervisory intelligence analyst for the FBI Boston office. Really experienced guy, knows a lot about the threat landscape. He's also been my confidant of late. We're talking about issues out there and really just commiserating about leg day. And we're talking about this atrophied muscle that I might have from being a hobbyist podcast host. So I'm going to try to hit the ground running. I'm going to need some air support and maybe some leg support from my friend George Hill. I don't know how I did. How would you rank me and grade me on the introduction, sir?
It was good. Can you hear me okay? Because when you switched to live, my headphones stopped working, and all my stuff says I'm using the microphone, uh, an external microphone. It's much better quality than what comes with the computer. So is everything okay?
Loud and
Okay.
clear. And that's a relief because I want to definitely ping you on this big story that you brought to my attention, all the other suspendables' attention, and even our mutual friend Steve Baker's attention. He was able, as a journalist, to vet out a lot of the details surrounding this. But just for people's awareness, maybe they weren't necessarily tracking on it. Let's go to the source of the original story, which was the United States Secret Service. They did a discovery, an investigation, and this came out at the end of September. So from the secretservice.gov website, headline: U.S. Secret Service dismantles imminent telecommunications threat in New York tri-state area. And the subsequent piece that came from both Steve Baker and Joe Hanneman over at The Blaze was an exclusive that they put out that China was behind this massive nationwide SIM farm network that directly threatens the American critical infrastructure. Now, I think we're both maybe a little bit out of our depth on the tech side of things, but you were able to identify the potentiality for this to be considered an act of war here. And for those who don't know, what a SIM farm is, what is it? The acronym is SIM, Sierra India Mike, Subscriber Identity Module. If you look at the thumbnail for the day, it's these SIM cards sitting on top of a Chinese flag. How is this an act of war? What's the potentiality here, George? I'll give you the floor.
So I know this is not like tech bro uh, podcast, but we see like in movies, people will pull the SIM card out of their phone to deactivate it. They'll snap them in half, or they'll put in another SIM card to give it an identity. So a SIM card farm is nothing more than large plug-ins where you can plug in hundreds of SIM cards and route tens of thousands of phone numbers on a rotating basis before any kind of collection effort can take place. So if you have, say, for example, a T3, if you're the FBI or even up on a FISA, you won't know what number to go up on to collect against. So these are a standalone, impenetrable, unknown to federal law enforcement or Department of Defense assets, whereby the Chinese government can communicate clandestinely, not only with their agents here in the United States, but they also run a very large criminal enterprise. We know that during the Biden administration, we had thousands of military-age male Chinese come across the border. Yeah, some of them probably were operators and trained by Chinese intelligence services, but a number of them were just straight up criminals, and they run large marijuana farms in Maine, Oklahoma, and California. So this is a clandestine communications network that's being used to, as the name implies, both for state sponsored activities as well as criminal activities. We also know that, and I knew this from my time at Office of National Drug Control Policy, we could see members of the Mexican cartels working out of Wuhan, China, directly embedded there with the Chinese Communist Party to facilitate the transfer of either precursor materials or fentanyl directly from China to primarily the Baja Peninsula, where they were offloaded onto smaller ships. So this capability exists not just in New York, but our sources, the suspendables sources, estimate that there are anywhere from 60 to 100 of these around the entire United States, as well as the Western democracies, and they've been in place for 20 years. I'll take a breath.
All right. Now, a couple of concerns for me that immediately jumped out. And if you read this piece again from the Blaze, I'll throw it up at the gear. Comes from Steve Baker, Joe Hanneman, doing yeoman's work over there. Chinese were behind this massive nationwide SIM farm network, directly threatens the American critical infrastructure. Now, American authorities only became aware of this because of swatting on high-ranking Secret Service executives. It did not come to the attention of any law enforcement before now. We don't know necessarily how long it's been in place. It didn't also come to the attention for all that talk about how we have a robust law enforcement intelligence network here. Really, at its core, we're all kind of leaning on the private sector as well, because we know that they're competent. They actually have to make results and turn a profit. AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, none of them detected it either. Which to me means that we are way behind the curve when it comes to this particular threat. And it's not just, this is a really cool device, guys. We should really look into possibly using this ourselves. How far behind the curve are we, George, on the nature of this threat from the Chinese and what could be the outgrowths of it?
We're 20 years behind the Chinese. Akamai Technologies estimates, or not estimates, they can state with authority that about 2/3 of the internet activity, nefarious internet activity that takes place, to include phone activity, so swatting and things of that nature, those originate inside the United States. Prior to a few years ago, it was out of the Netherlands and Eastern Europe, but now over 2/3 of it originates here inside the United States. That's great. We know that where it originates, but like I said, because these numbers bounce and rotate so quickly within the speed of light, that you can't get up on it, let alone ahead of it. So, I mean, and this is also kind of as a result of the NSA doing such a great job in intercepting nefarious communications originating from outside the country. So if you're being kept out, so what do? You set up inside the United States. We're seeing the same thing happening as the borders are shutting down, or the southern border is shut down. We see cartel members now operating inside the United States. And I know in my AOR area of responsibility here, when I had the high intensity drug trafficking area, it was exclusively run by the Dominicans, but now it's hard for them to communicate with the cartel members. So they've moved some of their operations, their people, into the United States. So that's what happens. You build a higher castle wall and somebody shows up with a bigger catapult or trebuchet and to get over that wall, or bigger, siege machineries to pound the walls into powder. So, this is just the nature of warfare, and that's what we're looking at here, right? It's just warfare right now. It's information warfare where, again, sticking with that 2/3 number, something like, well, actually over that, 80%, close to 80% of the personalities on Discord and Reddit are bots. The Chinese have over 100,000 people um, there that are ready to interact with these bots should any kind of human interaction be needed in order to keep the person that they're trying to co-opt engaged. So yeah, man, behind doesn't even come close to covering our defensive posture.
The Ministry of State Security is what the Chinese call it. I
Yes.
guess like that's their KGB equivalent, and
Right.
their staffing level is somewhere around 800,000
Right. They can
Chinese officials.
they can put 100,000 people in the seats 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just to manage these bot farms that are being run out of these SIM card server farms.
I mean, just for perspective, we have this government shutdown. There are 750,000 non-essential government workers from the United States federal government. And as an aside, if you're not essential, why do you have a job? And that's sort of a talking point that's been circulated out there. There's more of that than that number that's actually in their Ministry of State Security for the Chinese. And that's how robust and large they are. And from what I understand, these SIM farms are pretty cheap. I mean, they only cost 10, $15 million to operate. I mean, how
Each
much does a
one.
Tomahawk missile cost? One.
Yeah, each one. The program is in the billions to operate this. So I was on another podcast. Can we is the Kyle Seraphin show considered a competitor or friend or a frenemy? What do we consider that?
He raids into the AMRAD pod upon my request, so he's my
Okay,
buddy.
so I'm just kidding around, but we we talked about this on his podcast. You don't set up a SIM card farm for the purposes of making scam phone calls inside Westchester County, New York, which is where this one was located in. This is where Hillary Clinton lives in Chappaqua. And if you've ever been through Westchester County, they have guest houses that are bigger than the homes in my neighborhood, where with the workers' quarters that pour the wine and polish the silver and cut the grass. Westchester County. So this is a sincere effort by the Chinese government going back, like I said, 20 years to sow hate and discontent. Because right now it's an information operation. We have swatting that not only took place against the Secret Service director, but other right-wing entities. Tim Pool, most notably in the podcast sphere, was swatted using this mechanism, and my contact within the group of the federal government that's investigating this seems to be fixated on that, as do their colleagues. And I am more concerned about it being used in what I experienced after the marathon bombing, when the cell phone network went down. And now with 5G, well, these farms are also capable of bringing down the internet as well. So if you want to dive into that, we can. I kind of went off on a tangent.
No, I think that's worth going into. And then also I want to get to, you were talking about counterparts and who's handling this investigation and what's the nature of it. Because and actually, let's go there first. So before we lay out sort of what the threat nature is and these things without getting too down into the weeds, I think that this needs to be prioritized as a potential threat and should be moved to the forefront because it's more imminent than other things and other matters. I do want to note how there's a curious absence of which agencies of the government are investigating this. I mean, from this piece over at the Blaze, they do note that Homeland Security Investigations, that's the 1811 criminal investigative arm of Department of Homeland Security, they've been tasked with investigating it because the Secret Service was discovering it. I know the Department of Justice is going to get involved as a prosecutorial arm. ODNI is as well. Curious absence of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. Maybe there's some trust issues there. We can't really comment. We're on the outside. But George, if I was tasked with investigating this, let's make the pitch. They say they make you a special government employee. Let's say they make me a special government employee. I'm certainly not an employee. It's been 6 weeks. It's inflation of the days, 30 to 42. Who knows? How can we make the pitch what we would do to investigate this rather than just saying, that's a pretty cool tool, bro? Well, how do we do this? I certainly, as an investigator, would want to bring on a supervisory intelligence analyst who's got this background like you. You and I team up. We've got the Avengers here, the suspendable Avengers. How would you go about developing and bringing forward a full investigation to counter this?
You need to make the case to DNI Tulsi Gabbard and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and the National Security Advisor, and I am so sorry the name is escaping me right now, to those three individuals, that this is an existential threat to the continuation of the United States, far greater than anything else that we're staring down the barrel of, to include a nuclear-armed North Korea. The reason it is because if you take down the internet, you're bringing down point of sales terminals, which shuts down not just the ability to go to Walmart or Home Depot and buy a case of water, but it shuts down the entire distribution network, because point of sales terminals work not only as the name implies, but it sends demand codes to suppliers, manufacturers, and even down to producers of raw material, whether that be to Weyerhaeuser, who mills the lumber, or to the mom and pop lumber company in the Pacific Northwest that cuts down timber. So once you shut down the internet and point of sales terminals, everything grinds to a halt. And then you've got 72 hours to get that back up, or you're looking at Mad Max levels of craziness. Because even if stores switch to a cash only basis, that'll only last for a couple of hours until the first person says, you know what, screw this. I'm not waiting for this. I got starving kids at home. I need water. I need infant formula or whatever. Your prescriptions, none of that stuff is going to flow after within a couple of days. So this is why I consider it an existential threat. So the like I said, the National Command Authority, the people that I just named, need to be made aware of this. And it also needs to be viewed within the context of, okay, I told you that this is possible. This is how it could work. You need to look at it within the geopolitical spectrum. You've got President Xi of China saying that Taiwan will be joined with mainland China by 2027. You have a war in Russia and Ukraine that is escalating on a daily basis, whereas Ukraine is attacking Russian petroleum critical infrastructure for distributing crude oil and refining capacity. You have gas lines being formed in Russia right now. You don't have to take my word on any of this. A quick internet search will show that Russia's economy is grinding to a halt. No differently than if you ran out of oil in your minivan. You know, the gears are going to turn for a while, but eventually it's all going to grind to a halt. And that's where we are on that little war over there. We also have Hamas dragging their feet over this peace deal, which is what they do. Like, nobody should be surprised about that. And I'm putting all this out there because it all figures into the calculus that China would have to consider as to whether or not they're going to use these SIM card farms. Because then you're looking at use it or lose it. They know that we're going out there and we're identifying these locations and we're going to take them down. Well, in the meantime, they're probably hardening those locations, trying to either move them or be making them a little bit harder for us to find. But at some point in time, the calculus is going to involve the People's Liberation Army Navy and President Xi, whereby he's going to say, well, we need to go now because we're going to lose these networks. Well, why do they want to keep those networks? For just what I said, so they could shut everything down. Because if the Chinese decide to go in and take Taiwan or make a run for the Marianas Islands or the Spratly Islands or really go hard against the Philippines, they're going to want to make sure that the Americans stay home. And the easiest way to do that is shut down the internet. We're not going anywhere. We'll be back to writing Post-it notes.
I think that's a unique perspective to have on it, because we all experienced 2020 when they locked down the entire country. And the only way that they were able to keep this country relatively docile, with the exception of all the BLM rioting that went on, and that only started when the weather got nice for them to go outside. But we had internet, right? We were told, stay home, stay safe, Netflix and chill, use Amazon. All of that capability was there because we had the internet. And even then, we still had shortages. You're talking about point of sale issues. I mean, they could get into our supply chain and we could have, yet again, more bottled water shortages, more toilet paper shortages. And then you're going to see a freak out factor when people go to their bank accounts and realize that they didn't get a stimmy check like they did last time. And on top of that, their entire bank account has been emptied, which is another threat that exists with these SIM cards.
Yeah, those
They
are more surgical actions that you just went through. I'm talking about just crashing the whole thing. Right. And it actually works to the Chinese advantage just to crash the whole thing and turn it off. That way, when they say, okay, we'll turn it back on, you just need to face to the West, take a knee, and pledge your allegiance to Beijing and President Xi, the new ruler of the world, and we'll turn it back on.
So they can use a SIM farm effectively like an EMP for the entire country.
Yeah, it's an EMP. Exactly. It's a nationwide EMP that leaves everything intact. Your bank account, everything's all still there. And then when they turn it back on, now your money just goes to Beijing instead of Washington.
So what would be the investigation? that we could do as
So let's get back to that. So, briefing the National Command Authority, who needs to brief the commander in chief. And on Kyle's podcast, I said, well, if I were king for a day, I would have a joint agency task force that would include, at a minimum, the National Security Agency. Yes, dare I say, the FBI. There actually are some really good, smart people in the FBI who would love to get out after this. Secret Service is a little thin, but they're the ones who brought us to the dance. And the analyst that did all the work that identified this is on the spectrum and absolutely brilliant. This individual needs to have a seat at the table. If not, probably doesn't have the skills to sit at the head of the table. And I would probably keep CISA out of it because they're the ones that told us that the last election, or the election that gave us Joe Biden, was the most secure ever in our history. I think they're completely politically compromised and irredeemable. And also our sources at that have been working with the DNI's office have informed us that HSI has actually been doing a good job as well getting out after this. So now we're up against the entrenched needs for the intelligence community. I dealt with this at the NSA. You have people who just want to collect indefinitely. You can't kill this guy. I'm getting great intel off of him. I get it. There comes a point in time where every bad guy in Trash Canistan has to die. But in this case, you're really playing with fire. I understand that people would like to compromise the network and collect and monitor the traffic because it does involve some international criminal organizations. It is a treasure trove, but I think the risk is too severe to take that chance of just running it as a collection apparatus and not just take it down because of what it can do.
We're on the subject of threat review prioritization, and you just pinpointed something that's a little bit off topic, but I think relevant to what we're talking about here. The threat of paralysis by analysis. Now, being an operational guy, I kind of saw something similar being in narcotics, where we would have a drug target and we'd have a really good snitch that would go in and buy drugs, and you would get a prosecutor saying, we'll just send them back in to buy more drugs. We're just going to keep building this case. And eventually you have to come around to the conclusion, we're funding the drug dealer because we've spent so much money developing this case where we can go in front of a judge now and say, we have 24 buys into them. So we try to set up these guardrails and say, once you get to 2 or 3 successful buys, we're going in. It doesn't matter if we're trying to work our way up this entire drug network. We eventually have to take operational access. Have to take an operational avenue here where we're going to take that chess piece off the board. We're going to arrest him, even if it means that we don't get to the next level up. You worked in the intelligence sphere where you're not necessarily always going to go kinetic on somebody. I think you kind of could be in a worse situation where it is just continuing to collect just for collection's sake. Can you kind of speak to how that can have some downstream consequences that are going to be a net negative for us overall?
Yeah, I think I covered it. If these networks are allowed to continue, but at the NSA, it's not classified. I was the NSA's first pursuit leader, which means I led find, fix, finish operations, which is optimization of the SIGINT collection apparatus in order to fix a location on an individual that was deemed a national security threat, and then remove that individual from the battlefield almost every time via kinetic means. And the people seated around the table who were helping me do this required some cajoling and sometimes not so gentle arm twisting. That, look, I understand that you have 2 or 3 years invested with this individual, but the people that collect much bigger paychecks than I, some of whom have actually received votes from the American people, say that this person needs to die. And it's just human nature, that this is where strong leadership comes into play. That's why I started this whole discussion, just a few minutes ago, that it needs to involve Tulsi Gabbard and Secretary Hegseth, who are responsible for the security of this nation. And those are the people that you have to convince that the risk far outweigh the benefits for continuing to collect.
All right, you throw out Hegseth's name. and we want to get back to Chinese and the threat that it pose, and you threw out Taiwan, the I don't know, the caution that's been gone out, and particularly from the War Secretary Pete Hegseth, the 2027 date that President Xi has put out about going after Taiwan and trying to reunify them with greater mainland China. I have a piece here from BBC just to kind of cue you up on it, that Pete Hegseth warns China poses an imminent threat to Taiwan and urges Asia to boost defense. And the reason I wanted to bring this up, you knew about it, I didn't. I started to think just in my mind, George, we have this NATO thing that's supposed to counter the Russian bear out there. And I'm like, they're not the Soviet Union anymore. It seems to be more of like a industrial military complex scheme where we bring nations in, then we make them buy things from Boeing and Lockheed Martin because they have to spend that money. Is there not an Indo-Pacific NATO? If in fact the Chinese, for lack of a better term, use an EMP with these sim farms and say, bend the knee, turn away to what we're going to do here. We're going to go take over Taiwan. And because we want to Netflix and chill so bad, we just kind of allow it to happen. Is there not an obligation for the Indo-Pacific allies we have in the region to step up for their own hemisphere? Has there never been an effort afoot to say, why don't you contribute something to your own defense, or is it going to fall to the police of the world, the American government?
These are not rich nations. We push countries to buy American-made weapons. Largely, yes, the military-industrial complex, we have to admit that exists because it does. But it also allows for integration of weaponry between the various countries. So if you're low on 155 millimeter artillery ammo, you can get some from West Germany or West Germany, Jesus, Germany or France or Poland. So that interchangeability with weapon systems, and then the ability for those weapon systems to connect on the battlefield via electronic means, there is a huge benefit to buying U.S. weapons, but they're incredibly expensive, incredibly complex, difficult to maintain. A Tiger tank took 10 hours of maintenance for every 1 hour that the Germans drove it. An American Sherman tank took 1 hour maintenance for every 10 hours that they were riding around in it. So, we've kind of adopted the German method of making building weaponry, where it's completely flipped upside down from what it was in the 1940s. So there's that aspect to it. So interchangeability, interoperability. They don't have the money to buy these expensive weapons. And then you're looking at human nature. The country's always going to want to go put their continued existence on the stronger horse. And the Chinese do practice some form of capitalism. It cracks me up that the people in this country that are burning down Portland and Chicago and lately here Boston are anti-fascist, but yet what we see here is a fascist regime in China where you have this private government partnership between the Chinese Communist Party and industry. And so these Asian tigers, nobody uses that term anymore, but these are growing economies across the Pacific Rim. And they're like, look, we can still make money. We just need to make sure that we bet on the right horse and ride that, to our happy retirement days. If you're a captain of industry or a political leader in those countries, we used to have CETO, Southeastern Asian Treaty Organization. That never became anything. Now Hegseth is trying to resurrect that. But the bottom line is you have to show strength. And we saw a failure to do that during the Bush administration, George Bush 43, when we lost that P-3 and it crashed in crash landed on Hainan Island in southeastern China, and where they took it completely apart and then had to load it up in pieces into cargo aircraft. And by the way, we had to use Russian aircraft to take that back to the United States because ours weren't big enough. It's those little things that add up, denying transit of international waters. And that's what the Chinese are trying to do with these man-made islands. We see them shouldering, which is a maritime technique where you literally Oh, I did use that word. Darn it.
You get it. You get a dispensation because George went to the deep pool. Because for the AMRAD pod audience, George Hill and I talk about leg day, and then we always wind up at a conversation about mechanized vehicles from World War II, and you referenced Tiger tanks. So you get a dispensation one
Thanks.
time.
At least I didn't up talk. Like every sentence ends with a question. So,
You're not FBI Barbie.
yeah. So they rub, port and starboard sides, to push the other vessel, away. We see them using fire cannons, and sometimes they get deadly. One of the Chinese vessels took off the entire front end of one of their own. So, things are getting dangerous in that part of the world near the Marianas and the Spratlys, because, oh gosh, I should have looked this up, but it's about half of the world commerce goes through those straits down there, uh, through the Solomon Islands and Straits of Malacca, and to include a great deal of oil coming out of the Middle East. It's we do need partnerships with those nations, but unless we show strength, they're going to go with whoever shows the most strength. And in this case, it's the Chinese. So the Chinese have a bigger navy than ours, and all the people in this country like to, get all upset about it, like, oh, they have X number of ships. Yeah, but the Chinese Navy doesn't have blue water capability. They don't have the ability to send ships halfway around the globe and keep them supplied with full food. Yeah, food, fuel, and new replacement equipment. They don't have that capability. They don't have the capability to learn land aircraft on a pitching deck at 2 o'clock in the morning, like we do. That underway replenishment skill that we've been developing for about 100 years. They can't do that. So their Navy's not a threat to the United States. Their SIM card farm is, but not their Navy. But their Navy is a big enough threat to threaten the countries that you just talked about.
Let's talk about one of those countries, or the Marianas Islands, because I found this article. It was in the Asia Times. It was also presented Center for Security Policy. I check out their stuff because J. Mike Waller is a friend of the AMRAD pod, friend of ours. And I thought this was interesting because I had no idea that this was actually a thing. And not much gets past the goalie, maybe a little bit on foreign affairs. Definitely not for you, George, because you were fully briefed up on this one. But the title of this piece, again, comes from Center for Security Policy, also available in the Asia Times. Taking on China in the Pacific, target corruption or don't bother. And it deals with the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, CNMI, Charlie, November, Mike, India, because they're a U.S. territory where apparently the Chinese can go without using a visa. That seems like a problem.
Yeah, the Marianas is where we launched. I believe it was Marianas. Shame on me, but I believe the Enola Gay, when they flew out of Tinian, I think the Tinian Island is part of the Marianas. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so they're crucial to our defense in that region. But again, they're hopelessly corrupt, and they will go with whoever has the bigger wallet and the biggest gun. And that's that's just the realities on the ground.
So this article drills into one of the elements of the corruption that went in there, and I'll just read from it here. Starting in the 2010s, a Chinese casino moved tens of billions of dollars through a handful of tables in small casinos, duty-free mall, while spreading cash all over the island to include politicians and officials. They had the governor of this island. He recently passed away, actually. The late Governor Arnold Palacios came into office in 2023, replacing this corrupt governor whose name was Ralph Torres. And Palacios said that during the Torres administration, so blaming his predecessor, but he said $1.6 billion in federal funding, meaning American dollars funding, that had been given to the Marianas Islands, which is population 50,000, smaller than my town in Port Orange, Florida, that hadn't been properly accounted for. I'm just blown away by the 1.6 figure. I live in Port Orange, Florida, population roughly the same as this Marianas Islands, 50,000 people. They got $1.6 billion from the U.S. taxpayers, Uncle Sam, and we just can't account for that 1.6 billion. I'm sure it's far more than that, but I think it's reflective of how important geographically the Marianas Islands are. I mean, I think they're relatively close to Guam. That would be a launch pad for us for refueling and refitting any of our blue water Navy as a result. But $1.6 billion just floating around. And apparently this governor, Palacios, he begged the United States government to dig into that and find out where that money went, identify it. His last known attempt was, and I quote from this piece from the Center for Security Policy, last known attempt was April 24th, 2025. So only a few months ago. It was a letter in which he asked a message to be sent to the FBI Director Kash Patel requesting, quote, intensive investigations of public corruption, adding that he had considerable evidence to provide. But on July 1st, the FBI sent a letter saying that it was closing an existing years-long investigation into the former Governor Torres and the Chinese casinos. And just think it's worth throwing in there, there was a recent revelation about the current FBI director having ownership in some Chinese textile businesses. So it seems like we're not going to investigate the corruption here that ties directly back to China.
Yeah, Kash Patel is not mentioned in Peter Schweiker's book, Blood Money. I'm not saying that he is compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. He does own stock in a Chinese company, a significant amount. But clearly he has no interest in pursuing any kind of investigative activity in the Northern Marianas Island chain. But this is exactly how China took over Hong Kong. They just slowly infiltrated over a period of decades and integrated themselves into the fabric of Hong Kong society. And this is what they're doing in the Marianas. And this is also what they have been doing in Taiwan. They've been slowly integrating, and we're going to get to that in a little while, but this is why the people of Taiwan don't consider the Chinese as big a threat as, say, 20 years ago, because they've been spreading love and money around the country, investing quietly, propping up people that are friendly to the Chinese Communist Party. So they did it in Taiwan. They're doing it in the Marianas. We know that our politicians are compromised. And I just censored myself from saying a name because I don't want to get a phone call from a lawyer. But we know they're compromised. I think Peter Schweiger's done a good job of covering that. And they're doing it to Taiwan. And so that's the goal, right? Is to take some piece of real estate in a chunk of the economy without firing a shot. And you create confusion ahead of time. That's why this SIM card farm is so important from a disinformation campaign. Remember, it was just a little while ago when we took out the Iranian nuclear program. And what did we do ahead of that? We sent a bunch of B-2 bombers to Guam, convincing the Iranians, and myself included, that an attack on their nuclear facilities was imminent and it would start in Guam. Well, it didn't start from Guam. It came about a month later, all the way from Whiteman Air Force Base in Kansas. So we have all these things that are going on. Not all of them are going to come to fruition. Some of them are just a head fake and then a run down the middle.
I do think it's worth noting that that casino that was spreading all that money around the Marianas Islands, they had a CIA director on their board. They had an FBI director prior, not Patel, not Ray. They don't actually tell you the specific name of that individual. Maybe Comey, doubtful, probably Louis Free or Robert Mueller was
Louis Freeh, you
advising.
mean One Eye?
Oh, One
You
Eye,
mean
who was
the possible source with the Russian collusion hoax? That guy?
Louis Free, who immediately reached out via email to the Joe Biden's family when they were out of office as vice president because he wanted to represent them.
Yeah.
He was a director's director. He was an agent's director. If you talk to people back in the
What agency, though? That's what I want to know.
All right. Let's pivot over to Russia. We talked about China for a good chunk of time here, and you drew my attention to this. The conscription is continuing in the Russia-Ukraine conflict that has now been going for 3.5 years. It's just mired down into a a meat churning exercise as it exists now. So I found this from the Institute for the Study of War, George. Man, that seems like a cool institute to work for.
I think that's where Jack Keane works in, right? General Keane.
I think so.
Yeah.
Russian offensive campaign assessment. So this was September 29th, 2025, just a couple of weeks ago. There's some high points here that Vladimir Putin issued a decree starting his semi-annual fall conscription cycle. They're going to conscript 135,000 Russians to continue the fight here. But this is pretty regular. In the numbers that they have pretty consistent across the board. Kremlin also plans to spend $183 billion. It's in rubles, but $183 billion on national security and defense next year. That's 38% of its annual expenditure. And a U.S. special envoy to Ukraine, General Keith Kellogg, acknowledged that Ukraine has U.S. permission to conduct long-range strikes into Russian territories. So continuing to escalate. I don't know. There were talks in the early days of the Trump administration part due that this would be over. I mean, Trump promised day one it would be done, but it doesn't seem to be happening, George.
You would think for a successful businessman that you would underpromise and overdeliver, but yeah, he sure screwed the pooch on that one, didn't he? So the Russians have been able to fight this war exclusively by writing huge checks to soldiers, sending them to the front line with very little training and then into the meat grinder. So this conscription is a big deal. So because there's only there's 3 fighting seasons for that part of the world, and one of them is not the springtime. That's the mud season. So as the ground hardens up, it makes it easier because war is all about logistics, right? Experts talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. So he's getting ready to do something that he's been avoiding since day one, since this special military operation started. And that could cause some problems because they found what we do with our currency. They have just cranked up the printing press and then just printing rubles like they were monopoly money. So not only are people lining up at gas stations, but they have less and less take-home pay because of the war in Ukraine. I don't know off the top of my head because that data is really hard to get anyway from the Russians what their inflation rate is. But we do know from man on the street interviews, and again, that's anecdotal, but that's inflation is significant. Fuel and other fuel oil, heating oil, those sorts of things are becoming in short supply as we move into the Russian winter. And now they're going to pull 130,000 people and send them into the meat grinder. That might be enough for the average, citizen in Russia to say, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. But Putin has maintained, he's done a great job of consolidating control. That's not accolades. That's just a fact. He's going to be tough to kick out of office, but it may come to that. We'll have to wait and see. But if it's going to happen, it's going to happen sooner than later.
Are we more likely? I mean, the whole two-front war philosophy of our military, right? Run by the Department of War, is that the American military is supposed to be capable of, at any given time, fighting a two-front war. China moves on Taiwan. Ukraine gets more aggressive, and now the Donald Trump administration, part due, has said that they believe that Ukraine can win. And I guess that's now based. It's now based to wave blue and gold flags on the well of the Senate. I don't know if we're capable of doing that, George.
We're not capable of doing it, and you
home.
left out one key part. South Korea is thinking of closing our bases on the peninsula. They too have been co-opted as well to view North Korea as, excuse me, less of a threat.
And we haven't even touched on Hamas and Israel. So that's a 3-front war because there's not a chance that our GOP-run government is not going to go all in to support Israel if it goes kinetic, right?
Well, the Department of Homeland Security has only kicked out, maybe 2 million people since the beginning of the administration, and we had 20 million come across the border. How many bad guys are still left in the country? We're picking up criminals. How many professional soldiers and intelligence officers are still roaming around our country untouched?
I think the last time I checked into it, I believe that they were apprehending 30,000 illegals a month. That was the general pace. That doesn't mean deporting them. They were apprehending them. They were arresting them 30,000. That would be 1,000 a day, 365,000 a year over a 4-year period, 1.3 million arrests. But they were only deporting, I don't know, 40% of those. So you're well under a million at that point of actual deportations. And they're
Well,
relying on going.
DHS says 1.6 self-deported.
Mm.
So, but like, I don't know what the basis for that number is. Is somebody counting heads like, okay, there's one, okay, there's two, like, I don't know. I'm going to have to take their word for it. And I, like most people, don't trust my government.
Mm. Well, I mean, you certainly trust them to stay open, right? To pass appropriations bills, as we were reliably informed by the Speaker of the House that he was selected to do appropriation one bill at a time. We're going to do it piecemeal. We're certainly never going to pass a continuing resolution or an omnibus or a minibus that'll ultimately result in a government shutdown. And the threat nature of having DC area food banks prepared an increased need because federal workers are so financially beholden to getting the eagle crapping in their bank account every 2 weeks that if that doesn't happen, they have to go to food banks. Could they be compromised? Is that a threat to national security, George?
You and I had to fill out a financial disclosure form every year because we had clearances. Um, some of the people, of that population that is spoken about in the article don't hold security clearances, but yet they're still financially vulnerable. So we talked about, collapsing infrastructure here in the United States. Well, some of those people work for the Department of Agriculture, the Department of the Interior, Department of Transportation. They may not hold a clearance, but they have sensitive jobs, right? So, so now they're fully available for exploitation by a hostile foreign government. And maybe all federal government employees should be forced to fill out a financial security disclosure form. That would be a good fix for things.
Here's the adjudicative guidelines. I actually went and researched it. There's 13 adjudicative guidelines for having a security clearance. And like you said, not everybody who works for the federal government has a security clearance, but it is guideline F, financial considerations, which if you hold a security clearance and you're having to go to the food pantry when you haven't missed a single paycheck, just the threat of missing a paycheck, I think that should necessitate a suspension of your security clearance. You should probably be removed from service at that point. And you're right. You don't necessarily have to work in a capacity where you're accessing top secret documents or even just classified documents for you to have access to sensitive information, which the Chinese government would necessarily want to get their hands on. And all they have to do apparently is pay you 1 week's pay. And most of the people who are in Washington, D.C., at least, probably take that up to consideration. And I think you should probably take personal umbrage with that more than most, George, because I know you've talked about it. I think it's worth you regaling the story of having been taken off the board by our government. They said, well, we have to assess if you've been compromised now because you reported having been bumped by a foreign adversary, the Chinese government. How many people in Washington, D.C., do you think maybe got bumped in the last 4 or 5 days?
Bumping, for your audience, is a physical approach by an intelligence officer or one of their co-optees directly, face to face. So I was bumped twice by Chinese intelligence and was taken off the board, understandably, because now I was being investigated as a possible security threat. And there were investigations and counter surveillance going on. And so my squad had to rely on other supervisors for the approval of their products. Now I could approve counterterrorism and cyber products, but none of the counterintelligence products. So I lost 1/3 of my ability or authorities for probably almost a year before my name was cleared. But I did everything right because as soon as it happened, I reported it immediately. I've been in this sphere for so long that I knew immediately what was going on. That's not the case for everyone. The General Services Administration, GSA, is the supply guy for the federal government, and they know everything. They know, what contracts are being let and to whom, and what's being delayed for delivery, or what's gestating out there that may be critical for our own national security. Maybe not a weapons system, but other infrastructure purchases. So across the federal government, all these people are vulnerable. But it makes me wonder, though, Steve. They published this article. Is that just gaslighting by the Democrat National Committee? Like, oh my God, we're compromising national security. These people are going to have to go to food pantries. Well, you know what? If that's the case, Mr. President, then go ahead and lay those people off so they're eligible for unemployment benefits and food stamps. Do it now for national security. Lay them off right now. It's not close of business yet. Sign whatever it takes, lay them off, and they can go collect food stamps and be locked out of federal spaces.
I think it's even beyond what most people realize of how this narrative about being essential and not essential has been further manipulated in light of the recent government shutdowns, because the RIF is back on the table, the reduction in force. So the argument's going to be made. Look, if we shut down the government, you're not essential, you're sent home. Why are we hiring you anyway? So you should be RIFed, reduction in force. The government's closed. Now the president has the authority to just lay you off and put you on the unemployment line. There are a lot of agencies out there now who are keeping people and redeclaring them to be essential so that they will not be RIFed. They don't want to lose the manpower. They don't want to lose the head count. So you now have people who
they don't want to lose this.
Mm-hmm.
You
So
you
that 750,000 is
succeed.
way less than it actually would be if it was not a Republican administration in place who had threatened to lay people off.
Yeah.
And there's financial compromise for people who do have the security clearance. Look, I know agents who were up to their eyeballs in debt. And that's why they were willing to go and get a experimental gene juice jabbed into their arm, because they couldn't afford to miss their next car payment. I knew agents who rented their cars out to drug dealers to do drug runs. Seems like it's probably compromising, right? You're helping to facilitate local crime so that you can continue to make your payments. But this is not a threat, apparently. It just needs to be past that continuing resolution. We're not going to do any sort of introspection or self-assessment about whether or not our own headcount, our workforce, which is duty-bound, swore that oath of allegiance to the United States to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, rather than just handing over sensitive material because you need to make sure you can pay your car payment or hit up the Aldi's. Well, I mean, if you're in Washington D.C., they don't go to the Aldi's, right? They go to the Wegmans. That's the higher end.
Wegmans or Whole Foods. Come on, or home delivery. But it actually gets worse, Steve. We're talking about the continuing resolution and whatnot. I've come to the conclusion that they're never going to get their financial house in order, and the goal here is to actually collapse the dollar and move us on over to a central bank digital currency. They create the problem and then they fix it. A good example is happening right now in Britain, where they flooded a small country like Britain in with 20 million people, illiterates from third world countries. And they said, well, in order to better identify these people, we're going to have to go to a digital ID, and you cannot even work in the UK without a digital ID. So they create a problem and then they fix it. It gives the government more control. It's the same thing with the budget. We're never going to see a clean bill. We're never going to see anything approaching fiscal responsibility. They're going to collapse the currency and move us all over to a CBDC.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just from their own debt perspective, they continue to print money. I mean, like I was having this conversation with my 11-year-old, so kind of a high IQ kid, I think good things on the horizon for that young man there. But he was asking me about the national debt. And I said, oh, I haven't been on a podcast for a while, son, so I got a monologue here. But effectively, let me explain it to your sixth grade mind. The government prints a bunch of money, making the money that exists worth less. Ergo, the money you have and you earn from your job doesn't buy as much. So you go to the government and say that I need to get some of that sweet, sweet government cash. So they say, oh, look, we have a greater demand from the people. We should print more money so we can give it to them. And when they print more money, that makes the money worth less. And then it means that the people who are earning that money need more from the government. It's almost like a dog chasing its tail. It's a cycle where they say, we are creating the problem, and then that will filter people into the solution, which is greater overall government. And then you're right, there's a control aspect to it where we'll have a central bank digital currency where they'll be able to track everything. And why are you opposed to that? Are you doing a terrorism out there? But George, look, we sound like extremists. We sound like people who should probably be on a hate map from the Southern Poverty Law Center. So let's pivot over to that one because we did have, and credit where credit is due, it seems like the FBI is severing its relationship with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And how is this a threat? Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center has identified threats out there for nigh on decades. And the federal government, when it's run by communists, is all too happy to imbibe those and then send the attack dog out there to reorient, to do a threat review prioritization so that it could prioritize people based on the hate map generated by the Southern Poverty Law Center and go after people. And it gets worse than that. But before I give you some of the additional details, what's your reaction to the Southern Poverty Law Center being kicked out? And have you had any experience with having to review intelligence products that were generated by your subordinates that used the SPLC to substantiate their claims before?
In the immortal words of Detective John McClane of NYPD, welcome to the party, pal. I mean, where have you been, Cash? I mean, we should have severed those ties on as soon as he came into office. Why almost a year later are we finally getting around to doing it? And even we know that the FBI is still going after Christian groups. So, all right, so we severed the ties with them. And I don't know that we have. I guess we're going to have to take the man at his word right now. My analysts know me. They were never so stupid as to use something like that because that's exactly how I would have handled it. I just would have wadded it up and threw it in their face.
The DOJ, George, during the Biden administration, got briefings from the Southern Poverty Law Center right after they added Moms for Liberty to the hate map. They had the bona fides. They were legit. We're going to rely on the private industry. But beyond just the government, and we've talked about on the AMRAD pod before, the debanking things that went on there and how you could be put into a digital gulag and have your life completely destroyed because of the private industry, which is not really private because they partner with the government. But let's just completely cut off the FBI. And I'll go back to them in a minute. But big tech companies, and this comes from the Daily Signal. Tyler O'Neill has written a lot about it. He's an acquaintance of mine, but he wrote this piece, Breaking Cash Patel's FBI Cuts All Ties with Southern Poverty Law Center. And he cites the fact big tech companies like Amazon have used that hate map that the SPLC likes to put out there. They screen recipients for their Amazon Smile program, where you can take some of the money you spend on Amazon products and give it to a charitable organization. Well, if the Southern Poverty Law Center doesn't like your charitable organization, they're going to cut off the spigot of your ability to do that. And companies like PayPal and Eventbrite, they use the hate map to decide who they allowed to use their platforms. So it's not necessarily just limited to the federal government, which is a problem because they can take away your freedom, but you are put into a digital gulag, and donors of billions of dollars are then, you're on Amazon, you're shopping, you're saying, hey, as long as I'm spending the money, I'd like some of the proceeds to go to this charitable group. Well, now your pool of charities is limited to what the Southern Poverty Law Center says is approved, and that's going to be communists.
This is a workaround until they get their central bank digital currency. We just talked about this. This is about controlling people's behavior. This is exactly what we're talking about here. If you go to a CBDC and, in a national healthcare system and your blood pressure and cholesterol are too high, it's like, well, you've exceeded your red meat quota for the month. That's how this is going to go. So until that time, they're going to have these workarounds. We saw people being debanked throughout the entire Biden administration. I brought to Congress the Bank of America's misdeeds right after January the 6th. this is what happens. This is the fascism. This is the public government partnership in action. And it's easy to work from a financial standpoint because, oh, terrorist.
The George, when I was at the academy, and you were a counselor, I called you guys camp counselors at the FBI Academy. When I was at the academy, they really front loaded the criminal side of things, and the national security aspect was the final couple of weeks. I mean, it for as much as the FBI is generally more oriented towards national security now, as far as headcount goes, as far as where the pools of money go. When I was there in 2014, it was like 2 or 3 weeks max that was spent on national security. And I remember we got the video. It was like the substitute teacher was there, but it was actually the instructor was there. But you get the substitute teacher comes in and they just put on the video so they don't have to be responsible for teaching you that day. Our instruction period was sit down, watch the Southern Poverty Law Center provided video where they ranked the various counterterrorism threats to the homeland. And they ranked pro-life groups higher than radical Islamists on that video. That was being imbibed by future agents in 2014. So this is not new. This is the threat now that those guys are over halfway into their career. And were they like me and say, hey, look, I'm going to call a spade a spade. Southern Poverty Law Center is not legitimate. Or are they just happy to be there and happy to have a job? Or are they true believers, people who matriculated through our broken education system and then got hired on by an honors intern program with the FBI or support staff and were down for the fight? They're going to throw out their LGBTQ AI plus rainbow kamikaze flag pins on their lapels. And they can't wait to put radical extremists like you and me in prison. And then now they see an SPLC video that says that people who want to pray outside an abortion clinic to pray for the lives lost from baby murder, they're actually terrorist threats, whereas jihadists, Wahhabists are something that, well, it's free religion.
Yeah, I mean, they're okay with genital mutilation in the Islamic community, or beating your wife, or getting away with more than one wife, or if you're Ilhan Omar, marrying your cousin in order to get legal status. So this double standard, as a student at the FBI Academy, or if you were one of my students at Endicott, or if you were one of my analysts at the FBI in Boston, you come to me with stupid stuff. I'm just going to say, based on what? If white Christians are a threat, based on what? What is the data? Show me how many attacks that they have sponsored. What's the property damage? What's the death count? It's going to take a long time for anybody to eclipse the damage that the BLM riots did. But yet they persist with this, and they give it to the most vulnerable of people who are trying to get their credentials or their diploma or whatever, and the people just take it at face value. Where what they should be able to do is say, well, based on what? What's the data? How many abortion centers? Since we had a little bit of an uptick in the 90s, and so we're talking over 30 years ago. And yet they persist with this dialogue, and because people want to get their credentials, whether those credentials be official FBI credentials with a badge or a diploma, they just sit there quietly and they're like, oh yeah, absolutely, white people are bad, Christians are bad, we must do everything to stop this. You and I just finished a book, and I was unaware that Merrick Garland was a culture warrior back during that time in the mid 90s, fighting white privilege and institutional racism.
Yeah.
So this has been with us for a long time, and so kind of like those SIM card farms, bringing it back. They've been entrenched for a long time.
You're alluding to the book Blowback, which is a story about the Oklahoma City bombing and how it might have been an FBI playbook where they entrapped them.
Yeah.
Definitely
Well,
worth to read.
it's pertinent because we talked about it just about 30 minutes ago, about the SIM cards. How long do we want to collect before it becomes a kinetic operation involving the Chinese? So let's take the SIM card thing and put it into terrorism realm. We want to collect because the story's out of the news right now, right? So let's keep it out of the news, and we're going to collect, and the Chinese get mad at us for whatever reason, and just for 24 hours, they collapse the internet and our cell phone towers to get us to stop misbehaving. So and people die, people don't get their medication, ambulances are not dispatched, the supply chain grinds to a halt. Overall, across the nation, let's be generous, say 100,000 people died as a direct result of that. The FBI is going to come out and say, yeah, we were, we had sources embedded and we were on the cusp of disrupting it. No, they're not going to say that. They're going to say we didn't know anything about it.
They would rather take the publicity hit of not knowing anything about it than people knowing that they've been collecting on it and not taking any sort of operational action against it for as long as they've probably been looking at it as well.
Yeah, look, if the morons that they had on the Governor Whitmer, assassination attempt in Michigan weren't so stupid. I believe one of them was on the cusp of legally being declared mentally retarded.
He was basically Forrest Gump level.
But if those people had any kind of intellect or skill, they could have gotten away from their handlers. If you play this game too long, there's always that chance of things getting away from you. So it's the same thing with the SIM cards. You want to drag your feet on this and not take down this network, you're playing with fire.
That goes back to the hubris as well. At no point when they're sitting at the $70,000 conference table in the mahogany-lined conference rooms where they're devising these schemes to save America, do they think for just a moment, maybe that Forrest Gump guy who they're entrapping will have a moment of clarity and think, this whole plot that I've got going on with my buddy who's only available Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 p.m. online, and he's telling me that for the exact amount of money that I have in my bank account, that I'll be able to acquire a weapon of mass destruction and take down the American electrical grid by flying a 3D printed drone for the price of $150 and C4 that I don't have access to into a substation in suburban Nashville. Skylar Philippi, not talking about anything specific. That sounds really hard. Maybe I'll just grab my dad's deer rifle and go shoot somebody. That sounds way easier to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Or that same person says, you know what? Without notifying their handler, I'm going to move it up a day.
They think that they're within arm's grasp at all time because they're the best and brightest. Right? They're the good men and women of the FBI. All right. I got to pivot off to one more because I teased it in the very beginning, George, and this is our threat of a broken judiciary that just doesn't accept or embrace reality. So tee it up with a headline from, and it's broken media as well, but we all know that that's a reality. Headline from NBC: woman sentenced to 8 years for attempting to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. George, did you know that a chick tried to kill Brett Kavanaugh?
Yeah, I thought it was a young man. I was probably the only person on Twitter who took this as good news, and here's why. And I think you might have even missed it, Steve. We now have a legal basis whereby a judge creates a data point, a legal data point, touch point, that transgenderism is a mental illness. Think about it.
I think you're thinking too hard about it, George, but that's just because, look, I'll throw the story up again. All right, here's the couple of problems. I said a broken judiciary, broken judge, broken media. We all know we have it. So the judge, U.S. District Judge Deborah Boardman, she sentenced this guy, Roski, and the entire trial she called him a chick. He got 8 years in prison for trying to assassinate a Supreme Court justice. Just 8 years. So now we have the precedent of mental illness, and you don't even get a decade in prison. Enrique Tarrio was hanging out in a hotel in Baltimore on January 6th, and he got 3 times that for January 6th. So this is what the judge said, quote, "She has taken full responsibility for her actions," but 8 years is all they got. The judge acknowledged that this crime did involve domestic terrorism, but undid most of the terrorism enhancement created by the U.S. Sentencing Commission because in the judge's opinion, it wasn't terrorism. And the judge spoke for over an hour at the sentencing and said, quote, "Ms. Roski came out to herself as transgender in 2020, but kept it secret. Miss Roski's sister came out as gay 2 years prior, but Miss Roski saw that her parents struggled to reconcile her sexuality with their religious beliefs. The Southern Poverty Law Center probably had Mr. Roski's parents on their hate map. And the quote from the judge is, "I am heartened that this terrible infraction has helped the Roski family accept their daughter for who she is." George.
Look, the ruling's offensive, but is anybody surprised by it? The larger issue that I see is this assassination culture that we have, whereby violence is an acceptable means to achieving your political ends, which is the legal definition of terrorism. We also have, after the Charlie Kirk assassination, excuse me, the political leadership, the talking heads on the media, creating a moral framework to give license for violence. And now we have an affirmation from a judge giving license for violence. You get an 8-year slap on the wrist. How quickly will he be out? He's not going to do 8 years.
85%. He's been in custody since this happened, which was in 2022.
Yeah.
So he's halfway into his sentence already.
Right. So you know what? Chuck Schumer should have to do another 8 years for inspiring him to violence by saying, "You unleashed a whirlwind, Kavanaugh," that nasty old man.
Well, this judge did at one point remark that in her speech, she said that judges are not political. But I think we can rest assured that this judge, her name is Judge Deborah Boardman. I think she's a member, and I've been itching for this judge. I've been itching to give it to her, and the American Radicals podcast demands it.
Classic awful. AWFL, affluent white female liberals. They're a scourge.
They are indeed. All right. I've reached the end of the outline for today, talking about the threat there, George. But I do want to pay homage to at GOB Actual, who's not here. I'm going to have to fill in on those big shoes, give a biblical worldview. And I've got to go to an oldie but a goodie, a classic. And that's Esther 4:14. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. I think we're here for such a time as this, George, identifying what the actual problems are out there, laying out what we would do if we were in a position to react to it, in the hopes that maybe individuals that are in a position to react to them are out there will do actually that thing. And I want to thank you, George, for joining me today. And the floor is yours, sir, to close us out. And I do have to have you stick around for a nice palate cleanse.
Okay, well, I'm going to get it on the record. I apologize to Mrs. Friend for bringing any darkness into her life. We're just trying to call balls and strikes here.
Oh, Mrs. Friend is a robust defender of her emotions. She is, after all, from Eastern Europe. I was asked recently about how I could work with a go-getter female in one of my many, many job interview attempts. And all I had to say was, Madam Friend comes from the Ukraine. And that was pretty well received. Now, our subject of our palate cleanse, though, George, we talk about mechanized vehicles in World War II. We talk about how the Chinese are probably going to take over the world. But we also talk about Leg Day quite a bit. And I think that this is appropriate for you and me. Close us out. The different attitudes of Arm Day versus Leg Day.
Hey, how we doing? I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. All right, take it easy. Arm Day. Let's get it.
Well, hey to you too. Freaking Leg Day. Yeah, so bad news. I got legs today.
So great news, it's Arm Day. I couldn't imagine hitting legs like that guy.
This is the worst. This is even worse. This takes a cake.
No, for real, Leg Day is my least favorite day of the month.
Yeah, I wish I was hitting arms like that guy.
Life is so wonderful.
Yeah, it's Leg Day. To top it off, Katie broke up with me.
And Arm Day is just icing on the cake. This morning, I scored a date with a beautiful girl.
She said she found someone better. Someone handsome and blonde.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Hey, what are you guys laughing at?
You wouldn't get it. Get out of here. Scramble, skedaddle. No, but you heard me?
What do I have tomorrow?
It's a good question. Let me check.
Oh, Arm Day, baby.
George, truth?
Yeah, and sadly, let's see. Today was back and by day, which means the next time I go back, it's Leg Day.
You can work out all your body parts, but when you do the legs, it's called training.
Yes.
All right. That's going to do it for us today, guys, on the American Radicals podcast. Plan to be back with you Thursday, 10:30 Eastern time on rumble.com/amradpod. If you haven't already, here's your reminder. Give us a nice thumbs up, subscribe, follow, do all the things. We appreciate it as always. And until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.